This is the first video that will uncover both technological and ideological sides of our work on glass in audio UI industry and how it differs from other niches. And today I'm going to cover only Blender and Figma. If you need anything else, let me know in the comments. I'm going to share with you our work with our 3D designer and Alex. He's on this so-called call, so you'll see more of him and of his work in this video, obviously, because I'm not a graphical designer anymore. Yeah, I'm Natalia Guerra, by the way, your guide to UI design for audio, and I'm passing this work to Alex to dive you deep into the process.
The key points I like to remind myself when working with glass in 2D are reflection, refraction, and imperfection, which combine into a handy acronym of RI. In oversimplified terms, we can translate those into reflection is what's in front of the glass, refraction is what is behind the glass, and imperfection reminds us that this glass has a story, a usage, thus the marks to prove it. Right here, you can see that this glass is made of just a simple plane with nothing more than just a couple of textures on top and simple gradients. And of course, with a Figma's background blur on top of all of that. Here I have an example of how does Figma handle the background blur and what we can do with it. So just default Figma's background blur, nothing more there. It's extremely easy to use. You just add it right here and set the blur amount. That's it. Really simple, but it is too simple because as soon as we add any resemblance of depth, things may go a little bit off the rails, because we can see here it is implied that these objects are behind this one and they're all floating on top of some gray table, let's say, but the shadow of this object just goes straight through here. Okay, maybe it's our point of view or something, but then it does the same here, so it kind of destroys the feeling of depth. And I'm not sure what is implied here. Are these objects the same size but in different distance, or are they all in the same distance from us but different size? And that's where we can go a step further. So right here we have our object, but we can't just move it like before. It becomes a much more complicated process of separating objects into what we have at what distance. This object, the yellow object, is now the furthest from the ground but the closest to the glass, and thus the blur amount is the minimal but the shadow is the most blurred. I think something was close. I left some notes myself to remind myself how to move those, because it's not as easy as it seems, as you can see. So must close, shadow no one, for example. Circle close in, circle close in, out. Where is it? Okay. Circle close and out, circle close. So now we can move this object, yeah. So now we can move this object because it is comprised of three separate parts. The shadow of the circle, because it's different on each object because of the distance of these objects. We need to have a separate asset for the shadow. This is just this part. We need a separate part for the inside, because the blur is different for each object, and the separate side for part for each outside. It is not kind of obvious why. So, uh, but right now I can't use background blur right here because it just blurs everything. And this blur right here, it adds blur on top of what we have. Right now, this blur is controlled through the variables, and I can change it right here. For example, for the closest object, I just type 32, and it becomes the most blurred one. I type 8 back or 0, and it's not blurred at all. There's some light value. I don't understand why those two are same here. They look different for some reason. Okay. Happens to the best of us. So the thing is that this kind of effect is possible in Figma. However, it is too complicated, in my opinion, to do it in Figma. We can always easily create it in other software, in Blender, in After Effects, or wherever. If you need it in Figma, you can do it. But do you need it in Figma? That's a whole another question. So, as you can see, Figma allows for a faster and easier workflow with simpler designs. However, with more realistic ideas, it becomes unnecessary, more complicated.
Let me add something really quick. You might ask me, why don't we cover Photoshop? Apart from personal preferences, there are a couple of reasons. First, Figma is much simpler to work with, to start with. Exporting your assets is easier too. Plus, Figma gives you an instant preview. What you see is what you get. But Photoshop had some really good features. I remember we used to group objects, apply settings to all of them at once, and control them. And that's called variables in Figma. Let's take a look at them.
For example, I have two planes, both with background blur, and when I need to change background blur in one, I just change it in one, and then I need to change it in another, I just change it in another. But if I need to, if I want to change them simultaneously, I just need to always go in here, type a new number, go in the second one, type in a new number. To avoid this part, I just go into variables, I create a new one. This is a number, and I just call it blur, for example. You can put anything in there, it's just for your convenience, so you know what it does. And let's put 2 right here for now. And then I go here, and you see this cube, you press this cube, and here is our variable, blur, blur. Click it. And on the second screen, we do the same. Variable, blur. Now I cannot change it in here, but if I type a new number here, it changes both of those. And you can use a variable in anything. It doesn't need to be, I want this variable to be used as a blur amount and as the width of this another plane. For example, I can use this cube right here, add, oh, sorry, this is the wrong part. This is our width, and I just add a variable and use this one, and now I press 4, and now this has width of 4 and this has blur of 4, and I can control it from here any way I like it. So that's a variable.
As you've probably noticed, that Alex has revealed some UI kit. We actually needed it for another video, but since it's out, let's take a look how Alex created that glass effect in Figma.
So this glass plane is just a simple component with just one plain rectangle inside of it, which looks like this, separated from what there, the same component. The idea is that this is it uses background blur, which we cannot see here, but it is there because nothing's behind this plane. It uses a simple inner shadow to add this 1 pixel wide bevel on top, because without it, it looks really flat and sad. Then it uses a simple warm gradient to emphasize warm light from behind the glass. It uses a couple of scratches, a bit of dirt, a bit of fingerprints, all on a low percentage and in different modes like darken if we have something black on a white background, or screen if we have white on a black background, with little adjustments to make it look a little bit nicer here. And that's how it looks right here. Just a simple plane which we put in there and which uses all of those things. As I said, 1 pixel wide bevel, background blue, main color, of course, a bit, darken the bottom, add color, add textures, and here we are. I made a simple component when I can uh, quickly compare the, all, the very basic glass with no effects. It's just a simple rectangle with background blur, and the glass with all of those effects added. One thing to note, you can see we have reflections of the text right here. They're added manually as a separate layer because I don't use drop shadows because they I want different. I imagine text being on a different distance from the background, from the glass, so the reflection must be differently blurred and differently placed, as well as right here too. And that's it. That's how you make almost realistic glass in Figma.
Hope you're still with us. We are ready to show you some Blender truths. I remember how we designed plugins back in 2014, and then we used to model whole rooms just to get that realistic lighting because there were no music studios in HDRI map stocks. Now I'm passing the word to Alex to show you our Blender scene now.
So, realistic glass in Blender, yeah? Realistic glass in Blender can be easily achieved using one simple trick. But wait, something's not right. Oh yeah. Hooray! The thing is that glass is first of all is what it reflects. The purer glass is, the more it is its reflections, and the less it is its own imperfection, cloudiness, and stuff like that. So, when we see a glass sphere, why does it look like? Nah, because the only source of light we have right now is just a simple sunlight, just straight line of light from one direction, and that's it. How can we prove it? Pretty easily by utilizing the environment textures. Let's turn off the light for now. Everything disappears. And let's add Let's add an HDRI texture to the environment and add some strength to it. And now we have this kind of texture which envelops our world and emits light from different directions into our scene. And this kind of realistic lighting setup, pretty simple for now, but that's the point. We can have realistic lighting on our sphere. Yeah, it kind of looks like ice at best, but we can remove some glossy roughness and we can see that it reflects perfectly our HDRI. And now we can increase a bit. We can always make it. Now it is semi-realistic glass in here. We can always add some realism by adding some solidity to the object. We can always add mm, some imperfections. Just put them into the roughness and normals, and the glass will look much better. Although we can always turn back our light and put it like not spotlight, area light, and we can use it to add some much needed accents to our sphere. Like we know we need light from top, for example, and we can use that light to do it. Also, mm, we can turn off our back so we can see it, and we can just simply push render. And that's the price of this quality. It's speed. Even with just 500,000 samples and with picture like that, you can have up to 500,000 or more. It takes almost 12 seconds to render. With the noising, it looks much better. However, the noising eats up a lot of our details. Some details which may have been in this noise and it just couldn't appear because we have too less little samples is just fully destroyed by our denoising. However, looks smooth, looks nice, does the job. With more complex scenes, you can spend much more time achieving what you need to achieve. However, this is a realistic glass which behaves realistically. What I mean is that if we replace this sphere, this if we replace this sphere with basically a plane and put some object behind it, let's turn off the HDRI for now just to see what I want to show. Yeah, much better. It already makes objects behave physically realistic if they are close. If they are close to the glass, they are much less blurry, and further they're more blurred and more blurred. If we replace it with the sun now, we will be able to see it like much more blurred. Almost not blurred.
However, not all designs with glass elements need to utilize realistic glass. There are great, simple, minimalistic, or even toon-like designs out there which use a simple blur or just some of the glass properties and totally ignore the others. and that is more than enough in those cases. I hear now some of you asking, but how do I choose which kind of glass do I use in my project? Realistic, semi-realistic, simple? Well, that largely depends on the context. And the context is that this video is far too short to talk about this stuff too.
I think I want to share one more insight with you. Nowadays, when you're working with different web apps, you can use CSS to create this class effect. So basically, you don't need all this extra UI effects and assets, tedious export of UI animations, because in web apps, you often can use just CSS, right? And when you look at all those glass elements like interactive objects, apart from buttons, screens, and knobs, well, it's made easily with web frameworks. But in audio industry, it's a different story. Here, glass is mostly a panel or a background with blur and transparency, making just preset browser, EQ window, or library cover stand out. Kind of like those old classic contact libraries by, say, Adio or Addictive Drums, where you can see the drum set but still have space for the controls. Another common scenario, hinting at or showing the artwork instruments for a library. It's all about both function and impression. I think I want to share one more insight with you. Nowadays, when you're developing this glass effect, you can simply use CSS, so you don't need all extra UI effects, tedious export of this animation, especially with glass. In web apps, you often see these glass-like elements, interactive objects apart from buttons, screens, and knobs, with transparency, obviously. And that's made easily with web frameworks. But audio UI is a whole different story. Here, glass is mostly a panel or a background with blur and transparency, making the preset browser, EQ window, or library cover stand out. It's no surprise that space in audio plugins is crucial, right? Every inch of the layout panel should be carefully planned because it's all about function and purpose. In web design, you can play around with negative space for accents, for mood, relaxation. In audio UI, every detail has to have a purpose. Negative space is also a tool in here and really a powerful one. Space, also a negative space, is crucial in audio world because every inch of the UI and of the layout has to be planned carefully because it's all about putting all the functions with a purpose. In web design, you can play around with negative space for accents. In audio UI, you don't really have that luxury, so you have to use negative space as an extremely powerful tool here. When working with UI assets, you probably noticed that most of audio plugins were made with rasterized graphics. All those animations are PNG assets combined into sprite sheets. Stylized UI is either code base or also exported UI assets. So, as you noticed, working with glass requires both technological tech skills and a deep understanding of the principles, no matter the software. Practice makes you an expert. So if you want to become an expert and you need a professional feedback, welcome, share your work with us, and I'll be glad to give you feedback on your UI. And until the next time.